Okay, hi everybody. Um, Hopefully everything's still going well with you guys. We just finished up this past week our World War One innovation projects, and I was guys, they were awesome. Between we had some really cool tweets, we had some really good info there, like some really descriptive stuff. Um, I may send some of those out to everybody else if you guys don't mind. Just shoot me an email if you do mind, if you don't want me to share those, but there's some really cool ones. And the projects wise, you guys did a really good job. I didn't know with this e-learning what to expect on the projects because I was kind of thinking, all right, well, in a normal year, this is what they would look like, and I'd be there to help. And I guess I had lower expectations with this, but really, you guys, for the most part, they were just as good, if not better in some cases, than what we would have had if we were in school. So, um, really great job. I'm proud of you guys on that. There were some really cool innovation projects or some really cool innovations for you guys to do those projects on. So that kind of helped too. I'm going to get away from this weird screen here. So let's go pull this up. So we're going to continue and use this week here to kind of wrap up World War One. And before I start with that, what I'm going to do at some point in this video, I'm going to give you a code word, and that code word is what you're going to have to type in your exit ticket to prove that you watched this. So, I'll give you a code word and then post it on Classroom. There'll be a little one question Google form. You type in the exit ticket, the code word, and it showed me that you watched this. So, getting back to the actual content, the World War One, typically in a world history class, if we were all together, if we were doing this normal, I would spend a little more time on World War One because it was more of a global um, war that America didn't get into till the very end. Um, and World War Two, America doesn't start out right off the bat, but we get in it pretty quickly, and we're a main player the whole time. So what ends up happening is we kind of focus on World War One in world history, and we focus on two in U.S. history, and that lets us go into a little more depth on each one of those. So we talked about what started this, and really I think what'll help here is having this map. So this is a map of Europe, and you can see some of the main players here. You can see United Kingdom. This is England. And when we talk about England, we're talking about United Kingdom. France, Germany, Italy, Russia. This big giant thing is Russia all the way over here. And then you heard the term Austria-Hungary, you heard Serbia, you heard Bosnia and Herzegovina. I want you to look right here. And if you see this kind of area, I'm gonna draw it. Where's my let's change the color just to black. Okay. This whole area right here, for hundreds of years, this area has been a mess. Um, there's a lot of different groups of people that live here, a lot of different ethnic groups. And what's happened is, sometimes they get conquered by this group, sometimes they get conquered by this group, sometimes they've been their own country. There's a lot of ethnic groups, but they're all very small. So what happens is if, a big country tries to invade any of these, it's pretty easy for that big country to take over. So, you may have heard of some of these things: Macedonia, Kosovo, Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Hungary, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Austria, Slovenia. You've heard of some of these, I'm sure. Well, Austria-Hungary is this. You see Austria, you see Hungary. That they were one big country at the time of World War One. So when we talk about Austria-Hungary, we're talking about these two combined. You may have heard of Czechoslovakia, just because it's a fun word to say. Well, it's now two countries, Czech Republic and Slovakia, but it used to be two. This right here used to all be one big country. So I'm going to erase all this. Okay. So I just wanted you to kind of get the layout of the land, what everything looked like there. There we go. So, um, basically, you've got these countries in the middle: Germany, Austria, Hungary, Italy, right? And these countries in the middle were the Triple Alliance, and they are fighting against England, the United Kingdom over here, France, and Russia over here. You can see Moscow, that's the capital of Russia, just right up here. And the hard part is they're having to fight on two fronts. So they're having to fight Russia over here, and all this Belarus, Ukraine, that was all part of Russia. They're having to fight Russia over here and France over here at the same time. Now, we're going to focus today, we're going to talk about trench warfare and what happened in trench warfare. And so we're going to look a little bit closer. So most of the fighting in World War One that was fought, where we think of trenches, where we think a lot of the innovations that you guys just researched, flamethrowers, machine guns, tanks, um, a lot of that was over here in France. So we look at France, and France is a country, um, you can kind of see it right here. It is, I'm trying to think exactly how. If you combine Indiana, Kentucky, and Tennessee, that would be a little bit bigger than France. Um, so we're talking about a decent sized country, but we're talking about one that, today you could easily drive top to bottom France in easily in a day, or side to side. So it's not a massive country. It's not like the United States. But most of the fighting took place over here. So I'm just gonna get my pen back. Most of it took place on this part of France right here, about a 700-mile line. Um, so what happened was Germany, you can see Germany and France share a border. Instead of just marching right through into France, they did that some, but they also went up through Belgium and attacked this way because it was closer to get to Paris, the main city. Um, and what happens is this. So I'm going to get away from this for a second, go to just this document. I'm just going to use this document to draw on. I told you in the last one that they were trying to fight like the Civil War. And in the Civil War, you would have a line of guys, you know. So in the Civil War, you'd have a line of guys. Let's call this France. And they would literally be this big long line, shoulder to shoulder. And then there'd be a line behind them. And sometimes they'd go deeper than that, but that would just be kind of like that. So we call them France. We'll just call them Fran. Um, and then over here, you would have Germany. And you'd have a line of guys and a line behind them. And then basically what they would do is these guys would march this way, these guys would march this way, and they would just shoot at each other. And we talked about this a little bit last time. If you've got a gun that you can shoot one shot every 3 minutes, and everybody's like that, it's like, France shoots, bang. Okay, now Germany has 20 seconds before France is going to be able to shoot again. And a lot of men died doing this, but, basically they would just walk towards each other and shoot at each other until one side gave up. That's kind of what it was. Well, now all these new innovations. Imagine now France with machine guns. If Germany's trying to do that, it would take them all of, 20 minutes to wipe out 10,000 soldiers. They just sit there and take them all out. So what they ended up doing was they started out like this. And I don't know if you've ever played any like Call of Duty games and stuff. A lot of those games, you're hiding behind buildings, you're hiding behind trees, you're not out in the open. They hadn't figured that out yet. So what they did is they still lined up these guys on this side of the field and these guys on this side, but they dug down. So what they did is they dig down in these trenches. And what they would do is, I'm going to leave the G for Germany and the Fran for France here. My eraser's not very good on this. So what they would do is they would dig these trenches down, and the soldiers would go in the trench. And I can show you pictures here. Here's a good example. This is what the trenches would have looked like. You can see these things are about 10 or 12 feet deep. There's a little ledge here. The soldiers can kind of stand up and poke their head out, or they could walk through the trench completely unscathed. Um, and they would build these things. They had little bridges over them so people could walk over the trenches and stuff. But that's what these trenches looked like. You can see another picture here. This one's not quite as elaborate. Um, Here's another one. You know, you can see there's a spot for these guys to sit, or they could stand up and shoot over the other side. Well, here's what was going on. So basically, let's think of this. The trenches were they actually made them zigzagged. So instead of making them in a straight line like I just drew, they made them like this. Okay, and the reason was that well, there's several reasons. You could put a machine gun right here on these little points like this, and now my machine gun, instead of just shooting straight across and fanning, my machine gun, if soldiers got to here, my machine gun could shoot right there at them. They could shoot straight across at them, or you could shoot over here at them. So it gave these little points where machine guns could fire, and they would place machine guns on all those points. They'd place them all throughout, but they always made sure to have machine guns there. So now imagine this: you've got machine guns at all these points. They would string up barbed wire. So you've got this. This is barbed wire. In case you couldn't tell what my drawings were, they would string up barbed wire in front of their trenches too. Now think about this: how do you win something in war? How do you win? Well, you either kill all the guys on the other side, or you capture their land. So the thing was this: in order to win, somebody had to go to the other side and capture their land. That's the only way they could win. So that's why we strung up all this barbed wire. So if the Germans tried coming across, not only did they have to deal with machine guns, but they had to try to climb over all this barbed wire fencing to get into the trenches to fight the French. Sounds bad, right? Well, it gets worse. The other thing, they would set up cannons, not not cannons like we think of Civil War, but like artillery, where they were shooting exploding shells. They would set up artillery back here. Artillery. We'll just go artillery. They would set it up back here, and this is way off the lines. You couldn't shoot regular rifles or anything this far. These are, you know, maybe half a mile or a mile back from the trenches. And they would shoot exploding shells and land them here on the other side. So before, if they were going to get up and charge across and try to take the enemy's side, they would sit here and just shoot shells repeatedly into this other side's trench. Now you have an idea, they're shooting a mile, 2 miles, 3 miles away. You know, they're not going to hit right in the trench every single time. But could you imagine being in that trench? You just saw those pictures of them, right? Could you imagine being in this trench or this trench right here, and somebody's shooting exploding shells at you from over the top, and they're just, you know, every once in a while, one's going to hit in the trench. Some of them will hit right outside. You know, some of them will explode right over the top and shoot shrapnel at you. It was just miserable. But the thing was, that artillery fire, only about 3% of all of the millions and millions and millions of exploding shells that they shot actually landed home and killed anybody in these trenches. Most of them just hit here and here and here and here and here and made a bunch of holes. Because you can imagine exploding shells make huge holes. That's what was going on. So now we have barbed wire to get across. We've got this area that's full of holes. And the other thing, a couple of you guys did projects on this. One thing that they did, they figured out they could put poisonous gas. They called it mustard gas, was the most common, in these shells. And then they would explode and they would pour out this poisonous yellow mustard gas. And mustard gas was atrocious. I mean, not only it would get in your lungs, it would literally burn. The sulfur would burn your lungs, and you would. I mean, if you got mustard gas, you were pretty much gonna die. And it was almost like your lungs would burn, and that's how you would die. Is you couldn't breathe anymore, your lungs would burn, deteriorate. It was almost like burning from the inside out. If it got on your skin, it would just melt your skin. It would just burn. You'd get these boils all over you. It was horrible. So soldiers had to wear gas masks, plus they had to wear all long, clothing, gloves, boots, everything. There's no skin exposed, or else that gas would get them. So you've got now, imagine this. You're living in this trench. If you poke your head up, you've got machine guns shooting at you. You've got snipers shooting at you. If you have to try to charge to the other side, you've got to climb your own barbed wire, make your way through. This is usually a couple hundred yards. You're probably talking, you know, you're probably talking 3 or 4 football fields. Make your way, weave through the holes, try not to hit any, running through any gas, get through their barbed wire, get past their machine guns, and then get into the trench where now you've got guys with rifles and knives and stuff like that, and you're fighting hand-to-hand combat. I mean, imagine you could send thousands of soldiers across there and only a dozen or so get there. That's why this land here in the middle became known as no man's land. Okay, that's what we ended up calling this area in the middle as no man's land because nobody could survive there. It was just lucky if you could get across. So you think about this, and it's horrible. There were these trenches. I told you, if you look back at our map of France, France is 700 miles top to bottom, but those trenches kind of weave back and forth. There were 35,000 miles of trenches. 35,000 miles of trenches full of soldiers. Um, and what would happen is, they would fight for, you know, months at a time because, any smart general knows if we attack the other side right now, we're going to lose a bunch of men. So what they ended up doing is they would sit in these trenches for days, not really doing anything. They'd sit there and guys would go on watch and they'd have to look, make sure the Germans didn't come across. Nobody came across. Good day. Um, but both sides were constantly, while they were just looking at each other, artillery back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, poison gas back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So a typical day, we're going to look at like a typical day and read some journal entries from some soldiers. Life in the trenches was awful. There were some nice things. The food was good, um, because what was happening is for these soldiers, if I can grab this and move, you think about this. If you have a trench right here, let's say you have a trench here. These are all good guys back here. Okay, the Germans are in this trench. The Americans, the British, the French are in this trench. Well, what they were doing, they were literally getting newspapers from London. They were just shipping them over. They were getting newspapers. They were getting food. They had all that kind of stuff. The problem is they couldn't leave. If they left the trenches, the Germans would overrun it. They couldn't attack the Germans because every time they did, they'd lose thousands of soldiers. So they were stuck there for weeks or months at a time in these trenches. And you can imagine the sanitation, bathrooms, the keeping your feet dry. There was actually a condition called trench foot where your boots and socks would get so wet your feet would just turn black and start rotting off. It was miserable. And that's where some of those innovations, came into big play because you think about these trenches. What was happening is this is where we talked about machine guns. Um, we look at some of these. Imagine, here's another one. You see a guy with grenades and stuff shooting through little holes. Imagine if you got down in this trench. So imagine if you were an American soldier and you finally made it to the German side, you got down there. Imagine what you could do with a flamethrower. You hit that flamethrower and it's going to ignite this whole trench, everything. Their extra clothes, it's going to burn bodies, it's going to ignite ammunition. And they could just use these things and just ignite and burn entire sections of trench. Um, the reason that the tank that we know today got invented is because that was something they could drive tanks at the opposing trenches, right? Bullets are just bouncing off, and they could actually drive over a lot of these. And that was something, the tank got invented because men couldn't make it through that no man's land that we drew up here. Men couldn't make it through here, but a metal tank could. And, as long as it didn't get hit with artillery or grenades or things like that, it could make it to the other side and do some serious damage. So, that's kind of trench warfare in a nutshell. And I wish we were in school right now. I have some awesome activities for this. We just, we aren't. So, what we're going to do is tomorrow we're going to read some journal entries from a soldier, and then you're going to write one like you were a soldier, kind of take some inspiration from them. And then Thursday we're going to wrap up World War I and kind of look at how the end of the war impacted everything going forward. And then next week we're going to move into talking about kind of the time between the wars and World War II. And like I said, we're just not going to get to spend as much time on World War II because you're going to hit it a lot in U.S. history. And there's, with our limited time here, I don't want to double up too much. So I told you there'd be a code word. Um, Code word. I was trying to keep all these videos under 20 minutes. We're at 21 right now, so it's not bad. Uh, Code word is potato. So when you get there, make sure you type in potato for the uh, exit slip thing, and that'll show me, that'll give you credit for doing this. So good talking to you guys. Hopefully you learned a little bit more about trench warfare. We'll talk to you later.